So again, a great pleasure to chair this panel. It kind of links very nicely to our keynote speaker, because we're going to be talking about local communities, and that's the title of this panel. So we're going to start with Rachel. And Rachel is PhD candidate at the University of Sheffield, and her thesis examines the history of the Victoria Theatre in Stoke-on-Trent, which is, again, fantastic. It links fantastically well to Nikki's introduction. And it talks about the theatre, and the thesis talks about theatre from its origin in the Studio Theatre Company, established by Stephen Johns in 1955, through to the founding of the Victoria Theatre, Stoke-on-Trent, in 1962 by Joseph and Peter Cheeseman, and beyond to the first 10 years of the company's life in North Staffordshire. And Rachel's research interests include regional theatre history, theatre in education, community theatre, and oral histories. After you, Rachel.
If you're asked to identify key institutions of British theatre in the early 1960s, you'd be likely to cite the newly opened National, George Devine's Royal Court, maybe Joan Littlewood's Theatre Royal in Stratford East. If I were to ask you to focus specifically on...
Yeah.
Pardon?
I think it was just an accidental interruption.
Oh, okay. That's all right. Thought you couldn't hear me, maybe. If I were to ask you to focus specifically on regional theatre during this same period, you might choose Liverpool's Everyman or Coventry's Belgrade, or possibly Edinburgh's Traverse. I could be wrong, but I'm guessing that not many of you, without seeing the title of this paper, would select the Victoria Theatre in Stoke-on-Trent. And yet I'm here to argue that whilst this theatre in the round seems to have been largely forgotten in recent theatre historiography, during the 1960s and 70s, it was seen as one of the most adventurous theatres of the time. The Victoria Theatre became a community theatre in the truest sense of the term. And today, I'll be exploring how the theatre embedded itself in a region that was commonly described in the contemporary press as a cultural desert. Next slide, please. In the late 1950s, the Potteries was a region dominated by the realities of industry. With 94% of pottery workers in the country in 1958 being based in North Staffordshire, and over 70,000 people employed in the pottery industry, Stoke-on-Trent was the worldwide centre for pottery production. The air was heavy with smoke from the bottle ovens, and the skyline was dominated by chimneys from the local iron and steel works, Shelton Bar. Culturally, too, at this time, the Potteries were seen as having a drought. The last professional theatre in the area, for instance, was taken over by Mecca Bingo in 1962. How then did Stoke-on-Trent become the chosen location for the UK's first theatre in the round? And next slide, please. Theatre in the round was pioneered in Britain in the late 1950s by Stephen Joseph, an obsessive and innovative theatre director. He believed passionately that with the advent of television, theatre had to appeal more directly to a wider cross-section of society. I think it just needs clicking on one more for the quote, please.
Sorry.
That's all right. It's my belief that the single most serious ailment of the live theatre in our country is the fact that unless you can pay very heavily for the best seats, you just don't see enough of the actors. We just don't want any longer to look at minuscule peanuts gesticulating in a big theatre. We want to get close and see what's going on. Joseph's company, Studio Theatre, had been touring the theatreless towns of the UK since 1955, putting up makeshift rostra and seating in town halls to create a touring theatre in the round. Newcastle-under-Lyme in Staffordshire had become a regular visit on their circuit, and the company began to build a regular band of loyal audience members. Next slide, please. Meanwhile, young director Peter Cheeseman was employed as assistant director at Derby Playhouse and was becoming increasingly disheartened with the world of regional theatre that offered only what he termed as cake mix theatre, powdered scripts from London, add water. At a conference for the Council of Repertory Theatres in 1960, Cheeseman met Stephen Joseph and was immediately inspired by his vision describing him as the nearest to a genius I have ever encountered. Next slide, please. Cheeseman was soon employed by Joseph to help set up a permanent home for his touring theatre company. They settled on a disused cinema in Harts Hill, Stoke-on-Trent, and the whole conversion was completed in 8 weeks for less than £5,000, with no state funding whatsoever. Despite the significance of this event, the opening of the first theatre in the round in the UK, the national press remained uninterested, and even local residents remained somewhat indifferent. Cheeseman recalled, "The theatre was opened without a single remark in the national and professional press. We let off 2 rockets from the roof, but they flew nearly horizontally and landed in the middle of Harts Hill Road." Cheeseman quickly recognised that if the theatre was to be a success, he would need to engage the local community in the theatre's activity. In a letter to producer Peter Bridge in 1963, he explained that the important thing to me is the relationship of this group with this particular community. National prestige is fine so long as it affects the local situation. It is our own community here that is important. Next slide, please. With a permanent base for the company established, Joseph took up a position at the University of Manchester, leaving Cheeseman to run the Victoria Theatre in Stoke. In a region in which the cultural self-esteem was extremely low, Cheeseman recognised that the company's job was to make the theatre the centre of the community and to celebrate the work that was happening all around them. In order to be sure of locals' allegiance to the theatre, Cheeseman decided to employ a permanent company who were required to move to and live in Stoke-on-Trent. In an article for theatre magazine Q, Cheeseman justified his position. The existence of a permanent company is not only a better guarantee that the job of putting on a play will be done well, it also allows the theatre to be dominated by a sense of a common purpose, rather than be a place responding to and endorsing a set of individual, personal, and in the end, selfish ambitions. His support of the repertory system was also born out of his desire to belong, since he believed that actors ought to be insiders, fellow workers embedded within the local community. Indeed, the company of actors regularly engaged in a series of activities outside the theatre. They became researchers, presenters, childcare assistants, and educationalists. Cheeseman maintained that this work was of joint benefit to allow the community to recognise the commitment of the company, but also to provide the contact with the world outside that is necessary unless the artist is to become a mere creature of the theatre with no relationship with the outside world. Despite these honourable principles, audience figures remained a problem, with an average yearly attendance of only 27% in 1962-3. When Alan Ayckbourn left the company to follow his production of Mr. Whatnot to the West End in 1964, the Vic found themselves without a writer for the first time. Cheeseman therefore embarked on an innovative course to ensure that the theatre was able to offer something not only original, but crucially relevant to the district. Next slide, please. He began researching in local libraries and archives to find an important story that would translate into an effective piece of drama. Influenced by Theatre Workshop's 1963 production of Oh, What a Lovely War, Cheeseman decided on a musical documentary that would engage and develop a new local audience at the Vic and would help the company to discover its own style. However, the task itself was far from simple. In numerous interviews, Cheeseman attested to the arduousness of the task, affirming that if you wanted to choose the most difficult way of creating a play that you can imagine, you would choose the technique of creating a play out of documentary material, the way we have practiced it. In order to gather the material in the early documentaries, a small cast production was shown in repertoire, allowing the remaining company to be involved in the documentary from the outset, researching the selected topic and beginning to absorb difficult historical material. Next slide, please. It seems that in this young company, there was a sense of excitement to be involved in such an unusual project, but also an underlying anxiety. For many actors, their position as a member of the Victoria Theatre Company was their first permanent professional role. The company was young and relatively inexperienced, and their trepidation was therefore understandable. Not only were they being expected to research and make sense of historical documents, they were also being asked to adapt these findings into something entertaining. Stanley Page, an actor in the original company, remembers that during the first rehearsals of the Jolly Potters, all the actors thought it was going to be the most appalling thing ever. And similarly, Ron Daniels recalls the documentary process as a huge, scary adventure. Next slide, please. By the Vic's third documentary, The Notty, in 1966, which charted the rise and fall of the North Staffordshire Railway, Cheeseman had begun to refine the company's methodology. Whilst the early documentaries had used improvisation to link short historical scenes, by The Notty, Cheeseman had largely abandoned his use of imaginative or comic reconstructions in our own words. Cheeseman had always been cautious of allowing actors too much freedom with the historical material, and this predisposition was to become increasingly foregrounded as he developed his exacting methods of dealing with sources. For Cheeseman, a self-confessed Puritan, it was essential that the company's work was an accurate representation of the research. Rather than improvise a particular scene, Cheeseman affirmed that if there is no primary source material available on a particular topic, no scene can be made about it. Whilst both the Jolly Potters in 1964 and the Staffordshire Rebels in 1965 had dealt with Staffordshire's more distant past, the 1800s and 1600s respectively, The Notty centred on the North Staffordshire Railway line, only relatively recently amalgamated in 1923, and still known locally as The Notty because of its symbolic Staffordshire Knot logo. Cheeseman and resident playwright Peter Turson were therefore able to conduct a series of recorded interviews with ex-employees of The Notty and members of the community who had vivid memories of the local line. Next slide, please. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to play a little bit of sound for this, but we'll see if it works or not. Cheeseman's inspiration for using the tape recorder came chiefly from the BBC radio ballads, originally produced in 1958 by Charles Parker, Ewan MacColl, and Peggy Seeger. The ballads married actual recordings of disparate community groups with folk music written by MacColl. I'll just quickly see if this works. Doesn't matter if it doesn't.
Sure.
There we go.
There's no feeling like coming into a harbour with a good catch of fish. There's no feeling like it, especially if you're in a boat like we used to be with a good crew. You'd come up to the quay and you tie up. Now there's everyone come, you see. 100 grand, go a lovely shot. Get your sample out. Let's be selling them, you see, and you just lean back in the wheelhouse and you look. All I can think of is, if you was one of the old hunters in the old tribal day, you brought home the meat, you see, share it, do what you like with it. You see, I've done my bit.
The season is over, so be on your way and head for the home port and sign for your pay. Your missus is waiting to welcome you home. It's hard for a wife to be so much alone.
I don't like coming home, it's lovely.
So forget all the hauling and shaking of nets.
There's the old gal waiting for you. Used to count the days. That was like getting fresh married again when you'd been away about 10 or dozen weeks. Reunited again and just as strong as ever. Well, you're hungry. When you got down to North Sea and had plenty of fish down on you, you got hungry when you got home, didn't you? Yes, well,
So, a time when the voice of the BBC remained an upper-class Southern English accent. To hear authentic regional voices like this one, rather than words spoken by an actor, was groundbreaking in itself. For Cheeseman, this innovative use of the tape recorder had a distinctly formative effect, and correspondence between the two suggests that Parker remained an important influence as Cheeseman's interest in the documentary style developed. Indeed, in a later interview, he recalled his increasingly exacting approach after meeting with the BBC team. Cheeseman's view had shifted, and from 1966, he abandoned his use of improvisation in the documentary, becoming adamant that nothing must be made up, nothing must be invented, no words must be put together by a person who has not got the authority of either having witnessed or participated in those actual events. Next slide, please. One of Cheeseman's principal aims in creating the documentaries was to demonstrate the theatre's genuine interest in the people of Stoke-on-Trent and their livelihoods. It seems that Cheeseman's concern with authentic depiction was as much about doing justice to the community
5
story.
minutes. Sorry,
Okay.
5 minutes.
Okay. Doing justice to the community stories that were being staged, as it was about creating an effective production. The stories themselves often grew out of the company making genuine connections with people in the North Staffordshire district. The Nottie, for example, was based largely on the memories of Vic employee Harry Sharratt. Hands Up For You, The War Is Ended in 1971 depicted the memories of Frank Bailey, the newsagent who worked opposite the theatre and sold the actors their cigarettes and newspapers, and who had been a prisoner of war in Italy. And Miner Dig the Coal in 1981 was created after Cheeseman struck up a rapport with the miners at Hemheath Colliery during the theatre's touring roadshows. A significant milestone in the theatre's relationship with the community occurred with the Vic's involvement in the campaign to save Shelton Bar Iron and Steel Works in 1973. It was particularly significant since the Action Committee approached the theatre to ask them to create a documentary about their appeal, rather than in previous instances in which Cheeseman had conceived the projects. Here was the first example of the community utilising the theatre as a public service, the proverbial corner theatre, as useful to the working life of the people of Stoke-on-Trent as the corner shop or newsagent. Cheeseman's prevailing focus on Stoke-on-Trent then ensured that the documentaries were always firmly rooted in the area, with no qualms about the specificity of productions. Indeed, topics were chosen to engage an almost exclusively local audience. In an interview with Judith Cook in 1974, he confirmed this. We've never made any compromise in the direction of making shows comprehensible to people from outside the district. There is no point. They are our special contribution to its life, and any visitor who drops in must expect to feel like a visitor. The community responded warmly. Reviews in the local newspaper for the Jolly Potters described the production being received with acclamation, whilst the Daily Mail reviewer commented on the thunderous reception when the misery of the pot bank was over. Audience correspondence, too, is suggestive of the positive reception. May I congratulate your company on a spectacle not only enjoyable, but also life-enhancing. A sense of occasion, of truth, and after being linked vitally to a past that matters to the present, made it the stuff from which something larger than just theatre emerges, the hope that the city might become meaningful. This response was one that seemed to be shared by audience member and non-theatre goer alike. Cheeseman commented that even that huge mass of people who don't come to the theatre and never intend to seems to contain a large number who regard us fiercely as a cherished local possession. Thus, the documentaries became fundamental in the community's acceptance of the Vic as part of the potteries landscape, since they were proof that the company was, as Cheeseman described, serious about our attachment to the district. The success of a theatre's relationship with its audience remains difficult to quantify. However, Cheeseman claimed that my hope was that these shows would really intensify our relationship with the district and give this relationship a concrete form on the stage. They have done. The figures support his sentiments, with the yearly attendance rising to 69% in 1969 to 70. Moreover, he claimed that the consistent funding that the theatre received from the local authorities was directly attributable to their work on the documentaries. Cheeseman's commitment to the district and decision to focus the documentary work on the history of the region therefore ensured that the local authorities valued the theatre highly enough to increase its grants vastly, with very little criticism from the local community. Next slide, please. Cheeseman has been cited as the stimulus for a wave of local documentaries that swept regional theatres in the late 1960s and 70s, with the majority of the larger repertory theatres experimenting with the style. For Cheeseman, whilst he never attempted to define the term documentary, was keen to outline his own methods of working with documentary material, a process that Attilio Favorini described as standing out for its radical historiography. Understandably, Cheeseman was eager to clarify the stringent principles by which his company operated when producing a documentary, keen to distance the Vic from other theatres that were using the documentary label for productions which were in fact only historical or contemporary plays, in which the names of the characters on stage are the same as the ones they had in real life. For Cheeseman, then, the production of the annual documentary had very little to do with being fashionably in, and much more to do with building a lasting relationship with the community of Stoke-on-Trent.
I think that's time. I just let you finish because
The productions began out of necessity rather than from a purely philosophical perspective. Indeed, whilst the documentary is the one genre most associated with Stoke, it must be remembered that in Cheeseman's 37-year tenure of the Vic and New Vic, the company created a total of just 11 documentaries. Whilst the documentary represented much that the theatre stood for, it was its position in the carefully selected repertoire and the genuine interest that the permanent company took in the region of North Staffordshire that fully established the Vic at the centre of this community that became far from a cultural desert. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks very much. My name's Tom Greenwood. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a PhD candidate and associate lecturer in the Department for Media, Communications and Cultural Studies at Goldsmiths. I want to say thank you to Agatha and to the other organisers who've put together such a valuable event at such a difficult time, and to the other panelists on today, but on this panel, especially Rachel, thanks for that. That was super interesting. Daithi and Phil, looking forward to your contributions. Want to express my sincere thanks to Mi Comuna, who are the subject of this paper, who I'm working with currently in Medellin, in Colombia, undertaking my PhD research. It's been a real privilege to work with them over the past year and a half, both face-to-face in the real world and digitally when we've been in lockdowns. This paper, the title of this paper is Grassroots Media in Medellin, Colombia, Shifting from the Real World to the Digital During COVID-19. So this paper discusses the media and cultural work of the Mi Comuna Collective in northeastern Medellin. It introduces the context which has shaped their work and cultural center, which is the Casa para el Encuentro Eduardo Galeano. I will explore the creative digital work developed during the COVID-19 pandemic and the multiple challenges faced in the shifting of media and cultural processes online into the digital. The paper analyzes Mi Comuna's significant achievements in developing their digital work during 2020, enabled by their proficiencies with the digital, their great dedication, and their creativity through the pandemic. But important to this success of the digital work was working with their well-established existing relationships, which have been largely built through work in the physical, face-to-face, and in the space of the casa and out in the streets. Ultimately, Mi Comuna faced serious challenges maintaining communities and connections online. The collaborative, inclusive and creative processes that are so central to their regular work, their face-to-face work, both in what they call the protective environment of the casa and out in the streets of Santa Cruz, their sector, were hard to maintain in online spaces. The control over which was much more technically controlled and often gendered and male-dominated. So for a bit of an intro to Mikumuna, they are a media and cultural organisation that work to build alternative communication and cultural spaces with a social and community focus. They make visible the social reality of the inhabitants of Santa Cruz. Established in 2009, Mikumuna have been shaped by the context of Santa Cruz, which is a sector of Medellin founded and built by families displaced to Medellin by Colombia's long civil war. Colombia's had over 7 million internally displaced people over the last 60 years or so. I think it's one of the highest numbers in the world. The lack of a viable state presence during the founding years of this sector left incoming communities with no alternative but to organize collectively and build their own settlements. These settlements, like Santa Cruz, have been for many years stigmatized, initially described as invasions or pirate settlements when first established, then as illegal for many years afterwards. Santa Cruz has remained marginalized, faced structural poverty and violence over the years. So today, Santa Cruz and other sectors similar to it around the peripheries of Medellin are still labeled pejoratively as las comunas populares, the popular sectors, which is pretty galling given that these are the places where the majority of the labor force of Medellin live and travel from each day. But this stigmatization has led to counterproductive or militarized government interventions. Now that the government is intervening more in these sectors, but often with either militarized interventions or big infrastructure projects that often are counterproductive. The stigmatization also permeates the perspectives of the residents of these sectors. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Agatha. Thank you. So this is a photo of the latest edition of Mikumuna's newspaper. So Mikumuna were established and have been shaped by the context of this area, the context of self-built settlement, state absence and structural inequality, working alongside residents of Santa Cruz to recount and celebrate their collective experience and historical memory. Central to this work is this newspaper, which works with local residents to tell stories about the life and history of Santa Cruz, the challenges and problems that have brought people together, the cultural processes that have enabled them to resist. The latest print version from March 2021, we're looking at the front page here, was a special edition focusing on women in the sector in recognition of International Women's Day. Another vital, if you could move to the next slide, please, Agatha. Another vital part of the work of Mikumuna is the physical space that they've occupied since 2015. This is the Eduardo Galeano Meeting House, which is a colourful and vibrant space for social and cultural interaction, an important local meeting space, a creative space, what's described as a protective environment for the young people and women that regularly inhabit it. It's also the site of the annual Fiesta de la Utopía, which brings local artistic and cultural collectives together to celebrate their work and to celebrate the sector. I see the Casa as a site of struggle, seeking to be a common endeavour, building community and ownership and a political claim over much needed collective space in this sector. That's a photo of the rooftop and the Fiesta de la Utopía a couple of years ago. In April 2020, the Casa was forced to close by the pandemic. Mikumuna's itinerant street-based activities were also largely halted. Colombia's strict lockdown lasted for almost 6 months, with citizens initially allowed out just once a week. Across Medellin, the lockdown was enforced by the police and the military, though arguably much more so in Las Comunas Populares than in the more affluent areas of Medellin, as is the history of disproportionate policing in Medellin and as elsewhere. Mikumuna's activities then shifted where possible into the digital spaces. They already had a well-developed online presence through their website micomunados.com, social media pages for the newspaper and for the Casa, and well-developed audiovisual output. But there's no doubt that the main emphasis of Mi Comuna's work had been this face-to-face in the Casa and out in the streets. Even the printed edition of the newspaper was, in normal times at least, planned out in the streets and delivered door to door. So a forced shift of the work of Mi Comuna into online spaces would present serious challenges for maintaining communities and connections. Mi Comuna's role as a trusted source of information and a mediator between community and institutions became ever more important during the pandemic. In the early days of the pandemic, there was a lot of misinformation in Medellin. The real-world connections that they built up over the year in the sector and from the Casa brought people to Mi Comuna looking for clear advice and information. Online events that they ran included numerous Facebook Live discussions with experts on mental health and physical health, a series of online conferences celebrating the 100-year anniversary of this northeast zone of Medellin, film nights, literacy workshops, and what they called Cultural Fridays, which were music or artistic performances. These events involved collectives from across Medellin with which Mi Comuna had long held relationships and with others who they'd got to know virtually during the pandemic. These events successfully reached audiences across Medellin, though Mi Comuna understood that many in Santa Cruz in their sector missed out due to a lack of internet connections and a lack of devices. Next slide, please, Agatha. Thank you very much. So as a crucial part of their media work, even before the pandemic, Mi Comuna acted to highlight the challenges and the struggles of the sector. Of vital importance here was the severe impact of the lockdown on jobs and income. Northeast Medellin faces high economic insecurity and formal employment, very little of which could be done online, and with many people living week to week on low wages. Colombia had no furlough scheme, and residents in the sector took to hanging red rags from their windows as a sign of their struggles to pay for food and bills. So in conjunction with other grassroots organizations in the sector of the city, Mi Comuna ran an online campaign calling for financial and healthcare support from government. They used their digital networks and their reach to raise awareness, attended and lobbied at online city and regional meetings. Perhaps they even gained greater access to the city council through these digital spaces than they had previously. Existing issues that Mi Comuna had lobbied around for years, including the existence of other infectious diseases in the zone, such as dengue, were now given more attention by politicians, perhaps due to COVID. As well as demanding aid from government, Mi Comuna also mediated these persistent external negative narratives and interventions. In both the mainstream media and from government sources, there was a suggestion during the lockdown that Las Comunas Populares were not adhering to the lockdown rules. This culminated in a massive overreaction from the state, which in June 2020 militarized the neighborhood of El Sinaí, a neighborhood in Santa Cruz, to enforce the lockdown. So this militarization was pretty traumatic for residents given their historic experiences of violent military intervention or pacification in their sectors. So Mi Comuna at this point stepped in to use their networks, their communication channels to understand the situation and open dialogue between the community and the state. This was harder to do without physical space in which to gather and with the restrictions of being out in the streets. Nonetheless, Mi Comuna produced audiovisual content, online articles, played a crucial role in the de-escalation of this militarization. And it actually turned out that this supposed lack of adherence to the lockdown was largely due to children being out in the street, gathering around the public Wi-Fi point in order to carry on with their studies, which the government insisted they were all studying online from home, but due to connectivity issues, this was far from the reality. Next slide, please, Agata. So Mikamuna also worked to organise mutual aid support for the sector. This was realised through an existing relationship with a Medellin university, La Universidad CES. This is a private university in an affluent part of Medellin that wanted to accompany vulnerable families in Santa Cruz during the crisis, especially street vendors who were not able to work and the elderly. Yet the university did not know how to identify or get aid to those in need. So Mikamuna facilitated the mutual aid into the sector. The casa itself, although it was closed to the public, was also the physical site from which food parcels could be delivered and collected. On the screen, this is a quote from one of my colleagues at Mikamuna, just explaining the difficulty that an exterior organisation would have had in making these connections. So it's important to highlight here the significance of Mikamuna's relationships and networks to the success of the digital work during the pandemic, and that these relationships had been largely built through work in the physical space and out in the streets of the sector over the years before the pandemic. These relationships, which then built and articulated with lots of others during the pandemic, made Mikamuna more resilient when it came to the shutdown and to the pandemic. So just going to talk a bit more about the digital divide in this part of Medellin. While the digital delivery of information became yet more important during the pandemic, Mikamuna understood the limitations here due to the...
Sorry, that's 5 minutes down.
5 minutes. Thanks, Agata. Due to the lack of connectivity in the sector and due to many families being without internet in the home or without sufficient smartphones or laptops from which to work. Next slide, please, Agata. So Mikamuna called out the government, who had stated that all students were, all school pupils were studying online from home. They developed additional online cultural spaces to interact with the young people. This included working in small groups or one-to-one, reading together and recording the audio or video, then sharing these recordings with other young people via messenger services or social media. They also recorded creative or artistic processes with theatrical groups, clowns, magicians and others, but they were conscious of the limitations of these smaller or individual group processes, and that many people were not connecting through online spaces. In certain cases, Mikamuna stayed in contact with young people by dropping off educational materials at their homes, by conducting readings on megaphones from balconies, or theatrical presentations in the street, as you can see in the photo on the slide. So it's important to note that all this work was undertaken in a context of pretty extreme financial precarity. Funding opportunities became even scarcer than normal during the pandemic. Mikamuna always looking for collaborations and financial support, so please do get in touch with me or with Mikamuna Direct if you have any suggestions. So just to reflect on this experience through the pandemic, Mikamuna have been developing their digital presence, and they were the reference point for other organizations in the sector offering technical support during this time. A strength of the digital is having a broader impact at the city level or with those outside of the zone. And this became perhaps even more important during COVID. Mikamuna had even been discussing so this was pre-pandemic, that the long-term plan to move all of their media content, if not the collaborative media creation and the cultural processes, but to move the media content into the digital and to discontinue the printed edition of the newspaper. But it became clear during the pandemic that they were not ready to be completely digital, and they were the first to admit that the rapid entrance of the pandemic left them struggling to adapt their methodologies. Next slide, please, Agate. So, so pre-pandemic, face-to-face networks in the sector have taken precedence over digital networks for a variety of reasons. Processes in collective construction have been so crucial to the sector and also to the development of Mikomuna and the Eduardo Galeano Meeting House. This has involved coming together to paint walls, write stories, play music. This work is often centered around food. It's said that the sector is built on empanadas and sancocho. Sancocho is what we're looking at here on the slide, a Colombian chicken and vegetable soup made with collectively contributed ingredients, just what's available. It's clear that the collective construction of the digital is so much more difficult to undertake. While the online spaces Mikomuna have created are accessible, available, including the website, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, in reality, there's much less collective construction with the technical skills and access held by a few, with proficiency in design and coding held by even fewer. And these are mostly male members of the core collective of Mikomuna. More broadly, the priorities of the sector, including creating much needed meeting space, a safe environment for women and young people, countering the negative perceptions of the northeast of the city, improving education and other things, opening up digital space has not yet, at least until the pandemic, been high on that agenda. The lack of connectivity is, of course, a big issue here. Women heads of households are often the highest represented groups in many of the processes of Mikomuna and other organizations in the sector. One Mikomuna member reflected that this was in part due to these women wanted to be in spaces like the casa that were more freeing and perhaps less patriarchal than wider society or the home environment. Digital spaces do not provide this safety or this freedom, and more often than not, they are male dominated. And we know that they can be toxic or aggressive. I'm on my last sentence here, Agate, that's my time up.
Yes.
So the work of Mikomuna seeks to create a different reality, in part by celebrating a common history that is in conflict with the dominant logic of the city of Medellin. This work will continue to develop online and has developed significantly during the pandemic, though ultimately this won't be the same as the face-to-face work, at least until we can make empanadas and share empanadas in digital spaces. So last slide, and thank you very much for listening, and sorry about the airplanes going overhead.
I'm Dahi McMahon, and I work at the University of Derby, and the project I'm going to talk to you today is really about well, something I came across while connecting with the Irish community here. And so it's called Our Story, and it's Our Story, A History of the Irish in Derby. And that the title really suggests, really says what it means on the tin. And it is about the story, the experiences of the Irish who've emigrated here. And it collects, the main aim was to collect and share the personal memories and experiences of the Irish diaspora here in Derby, and particularly those who emigrated from the 1950s and 60s, where there was a large growth in that immigrant populations in the UK. It was a project that I came across somewhat accidentally, but I'm sure I would have found myself towards it anyway. As I said, as I established, came here. I'm an emigre myself, but I've lived in other countries too, initially to Canada in the late 80s. And lived in Paris also for a while, and now here in the UK. So in a lot of ways, I'm following similar patterns that people have in hundreds of years before me, and also my my grandparents have in the past. So it's part of who I am, part of my own makeup, and it's really a part of the Irish psyche in so many ways. Yeah. So as I said, it's a celebration of the personal stories and experiences of the Irish. In their own words and in their own voices. And so from my own personal experience, but also to find out, just because my experiences were the way they were, everyone's are different, and we've, through this project, certainly seen a really rich collection of those experiences, and I've only was able to gather so many. It's 14 of them in total, and we put together a film which I'll talk about in a bit. But really the key was at the outset is to get this oral history, to gather this and to have a lasting record that would, not only for the family and those members, their family members, that could understand and share their experiences of their parents or grandparents, and in instances that I worked in great grandparents, because they are an aging cohort. Okay, so they've immigrated, like I said, in the 50s and 60s. They're getting into their 70s, 80s, 90s at this point in time, and so it was important that we capture this, and be, because, like I said, we all have a limited time on this earth, and we need to make the most of it. But like I said, those are lasting memories because so we wanted to capture those. So really, our aim was to just raise that awareness of the immigrant contributions that they've made, and kind of, to promote this diversity, because, we know through Brexit, I feel that has unsettled a lot of people and made, obviously, the United Kingdom, separate from the EU, obviously. But what does that mean in terms of, migrant populations that have grown up here over time? So, as you can see there, so yeah, the image there is at the Irish Club, and that's where I came across this project, socializing with the Irish community in Derby. But the key founder is the Department of Foreign Affairs, and they outlined their ethos for the Community Development Fund, which supported this project. And I feel that our ethos for that is really what connects with the themes of this conference. And so the Department of Foreign Affairs, they support projects like Our Story, because it allows, in their words, to, quote, develop new ways to communicate and connect with increasingly diverse global Irish, including non-traditional diasporas and young immigrants. They also encourage intergenerational engagement, which provide channels for interaction between older and younger members of the communities, and to ultimately celebrate, maintain, and strengthen the ties between Ireland and the global Irish, to foster a more vibrant sense of community and of Irish identity, and improve the awareness, understanding of the Irish immigrant and diaspora experience. And that, that again, that's what comes back to it. It's that experience of coming to a new country, very different. The Irish have a huge history of immigration, like I said, in roughly 360,000 UK residents that were born in the Republic of Ireland. So it's a sizable number of people, and something like 10 million people have left Ireland since 1800. So since that time, it's been a lot of those millions of those were those, about half of that was during the 1800s. So it's part of what Irish people is, and they've gone. In the 19th century, in the famine, it was more the United States, Canada, and Australia, where there's obviously a lot of growth and development, the new frontiers. But then after Irish independence in 1921, the local became much more attractive, and it's interesting that at that time, before that time, people would use the United Kingdom as a stepping stone to America and elsewhere. But yeah, so they started coming in the 50s and 60s when. Post-World War II, Ireland was stagnated. Ireland wasn't was neutral in the Second World War. And the economy had suffered from lack of investment. I mean, when Ireland became independent, then, there wasn't that money that would support it. And until it joined the EU, really, that it started to improve in a lot of ways. So in the 50s and 60s, and after the Second World War, Ireland was still mainly an agricultural-based economy, with a lot of people living in rural areas, and which is it's not really a sustainable, it doesn't allow for a sustainable economy. So, and after the Second World War, Britain needed a lot of rebuilding and expansion. The infrastructure and buildings, and the opportunities then were plentiful in the UK, we'll say, and so the Irish found that opportunity. The Irish. They call the Hungry 50s, or the lost generation, is often what they would call that period of time, because there's so much immigration, so many people left. They went to the main cities: London, Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, but there was this real need for labor and service workers as well. The Irish were more than willing to fill those roles. And again, they were leaving Ireland looking for opportunity. A lot of them on rural farms where there was relatively small holdings, but Irish Catholic families, there was 5, 6, 7 kids. You're not going to be able to sustain that many mouths or lives on a farm. So, like I said, it was the circumstances suited kind of both parties. And so the UK being, the new destination is very close. The language was obviously a shared, made things obviously easier for that to connect and to integrate. And also, as we will see, that they develop connections over time. And again, the expansion of infrastructure like energy and transport and other construction was massive at the time. So they really fed into that. Okay, so let's just give you a bit of background. If we could move to the next slide, talk a bit about the methodology for this project itself, which really had a pedagogic focus. So I wanted to make sure we could involve students and make it as much part of a learning project for them to be engaged in an active research project. Okay, so you see some images there that they teach media production at the University of Derby. We've got excellent facilities, and this offered an excellent training opportunity for them. So it was a student engaged project, which was applied learning that gave them that opportunity to work on a real life project, and that they really enjoyed building on their skills. And as I said, fantastic equipment at the university. And so that really gave me a lot of joy, but also it made the project feasible as well. When you think, we did have support funding, but not to the degree that would be hiring all this equipment out. So again, and that's kind of our role, I think, in academia as well, to have student and community engaged projects such as this. So it really helped it come together. And obviously we had my own experience as a media producer to pull it together. And the main basis were one-to-one interviews with 14 members of the Irish diaspora who are living here in Derby. And so, like I said, and they emigrated in the 50s and 60s. So conducted those interviews on a standard set of questions across all of the interviewees. We filmed these, so recorded the film and the audio, of course. But really, as in, it's an oral history project, but having their images and filming them kind of, sometimes it's nice to, put a face to the name, but, it's such a unique, the cultural differences are unique, and their voices and their accents as well. A lot of them have been maintained over this time. Is really interesting to hear, and I think an important element of it. So if we go to the next slide, I'll try to share this video. I've got a sample of it. It's about 3 minutes.
I don't think I can play it.
Well, if I share entire screen, okay, you got a bunch of, okay, does that look like a big black screen right now? What does that look like to you?
Can you try sharing this once again, Dahi? I stopped sharing mine.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen now. It's all black for me at the moment. It's just the very start of the film. Is that what it looks like to you?
I'm afraid we cannot see anything. Is that the link you have in
see,
the PowerPoint?
You just say again? It's not in the no, it's not embedded in the PowerPoint. I'll tell you what, I'll play it and then you can hear it. The main thing is their voices anyway.
Okay.
So I've shared it. Okay, what are we looking at?
Oh, something's happening. I think we can see it and we will probably be able to hear it.
Is there a black screen right now?
Yeah. Yes.
All right, let's give this a go. Thanks for your patience, everyone. So here's a little teaser of our story.
It's a song called
Yeah, it works.
Street. It is about immigration, regrets and dreams and what have you. I've met some folks who say that I'm a dreamer.
My name is Monica Dwyer and I'm from County Roscommon.
My name is Patrick Francis Dwyer and I come from a little village called the Swan in County Laois.
Evan Murray, originally from Roscommon, Ireland.
Sheila Galvin from Cork, County Cork, Larry, County Cork.
My name is Peter O'Sullivan and I'm originally from West Cork, a place called Kilmatra.
I'm Mary Jetson from North Kilkenny, Ballaragat Parish. My name's Breda Brady. I was Cullinan originally. I come from County Monaghan.
I'm Sarah Ann Coleman. I come from Knock in County Mayo, Ireland.
My name is Paddy Conlon from Killinduff, Eastleigh, County Sligo.
I was always in trouble. I was getting up some awful ideas from my mother. I was getting...
We did have a poultry farm that kind of made us stand out a little bit from the neighbours because we smelt different.
In Ireland, we had a little farm and a shop, grocery shop. So I had a stepfather, and he used to go out in the van to all the houses and deliver the groceries and all that.
My father was a farmer, and we were expected to help out on the land as well.
I worked in the farm. My mother died when I was 12. I was the third oldest of 4.
Back in the 90s and in the early 90s and late 80s, there wasn't much employment in Ireland, and there was a focus in the schools back then to go where the jobs were.
First came to the UK in 1954.
I wasn't quite 15 when I left.
August 1955.
Glarry was out of a country place, and Derby was a town. I liked Derby from the minute I came because I did find the people very, very friendly and very helpful.
They played a lot of Gaelic football before I left Ireland, and I got in with these lads, and they had their own team, and I joined with them. They were called Round Towers.
England has been good for me and my family, and I'm glad, you know, I came to England when I did.
And soon I'm back to stern reality. Although they pay.
These are just the credits, but the song's quite nice. Let me go back here. Okay, so where was I? Okay, I've lost my page now all of a sudden. There we go. Whoa, the eternal. I'll stop sharing. I'll stop sharing. Okay, so if we can go back to the slide, I think slide 5 would be great, Agatha.
Yep.
How am I doing for time? How am I doing for time? Just to give you an idea.
Your 5 minutes timer will sound in 10 seconds, so you have about 5 minutes.
Excellent. Okay, that's plenty of time. So yeah, really. So the recurring themes of what came up from these interviews. So like I said, I interviewed them. There's a longer film, by the way, that's 26 or so minutes long that you can find on YouTube. If you search Our Story, University of Derby, you'll find that on YouTube. You can watch the full film, which is edited clips of about 1 to 2 minutes from each contributor. I couldn't possibly put them all in one film, but as you can say, there's plenty of, there's a ton of content. So, but yeah, what we found is, like I said, rural families in large areas needed to leave for opportunity. When they left and came to Derby, they found an existing Irish community, and as that grew, what's known as chain migration helped more come after them. So if they were established, you'd send money and sometimes a letter over to your family and said, come over here, I can get you a job on the building site or whatnot. There's plenty of opportunity here. As I said, they found work in the expanding British economy. They're working, our contributors speaking there, they worked a lot on the infrastructure, building power stations around here in Derby, coal-fired power generation. But you can also see that they found a very welcoming environment when they moved to the UK. And I know there's, in the Troubles then, even despite that, they didn't feel that they were treated any differently for being from Ireland. But like one of the real takeaways is that they've made a strong economic, social, and cultural contribution to the city and the area and the Irish in general then to the UK. But the UK has been good for them. And similar to myself, like I said, I've come here for an academic position, an academic post that's unavailable in Ireland. So these patterns continue to reproduce and repeat themselves. So what we find again is that the established communities here, through things like the Derby Irish Association, and then sport is a real central as that force to bring people together and to celebrate culture in that way. And I know going to the pub and that is part of it, and that's socializing. and celebrate the music and the other culture aspects of Ireland is part of it as well. And Irish people are quite good at that. But they do other things, I suppose, and sport is one of those. But the contributors maintained a strong connection to home as well. That was important to them. Keep in touch with friends through media, and then to travel back and forth as well. It was really important for them, and they've stayed here in Derby right up to their retirement. They're still living here, and so their sense of identity was very important to them, and they were able to maintain that throughout. And so we put this up online just before Christmas to share it with the broader community, because the wider public, because there's no sense in just it being part of academia. And some of the takeaways from that was that people found it drew their attention to the existence of the Irish community. Or we can just put to the next slide if you could, Agatha. The awareness that there was an Irish community in Derby, and a better understanding of how and why they came here, because I think that's important too. As we look at kind of broader applications of this, we can see that understanding why immigration is a thing and why people come to a country will help understand maybe their contribution and the value of having a more diverse and pluralist society. So people were certainly unaware, but also they learned how a sense of community and identity are formed and shaped, and the role of the host nation in the hospitality in this process. So someone said, for me, it was how these people embraced their new country whilst maintaining strong Irishness in accent, outlook, and traditions. And May spoke of the importance of having Irish communities around them to provide sense of belonging and community. And that's it. You want to belong somewhere where you're in your new adopted home, and that certainly was the case for them. So I know I'll probably have just a minute or so I'll just go through the last two slides briefly. So public dissemination and engagement is important for this. Like I said, it's a community outreach project, so it's important that people engage with it. So as I said, I got some survey responses that I give you a little bit of flavor of there. And that's important, again, it's to understand the impact. And I know people are working on REF, and I've submitted a REF 21 return, and impact is such a big thing. And it was a big part of what we had to push for this, because, again, I think it's important that people outside of academia know what's going on. So awareness of the community is important. Understanding immigration, as I said earlier, are really important. So you get that community, sense of community, how it's formed and how identity is reshaped and maintained. And so people can reflect on their own heritage, wherever they're from. You know what I mean? They don't have to be Irish. It acts to connect, hopefully, as a spur for them to reflect and look these things up. And I think of one more slide or two, do I? Is my time coming to an end? I don't want to run over to.
I think it's just
good time. So yeah, that's fine. Talk about dissemination and whatnot. And I think there's only one point to say at the end there is the Irish are a large and numerous collection of individuals and micro communities that are scattered across the world, but whom collectively have a shared heritage and identity. And the personal testimonies offered in our story reveal a rich collective social culture and economic contribution the Irish have made. And that these people that have come all over, a lot of them through chain migration. But the point is, by informing the wider public of this through public and online dissemination, the work is improved and hopefully will improve community relations through respect and understanding and appreciation for the rich and diverse communities in the UK. And so thank you very much for your time, and it's been a pleasure sharing this with you. Obviously we'll have questions at the end of the panel, but thank you.
Phil is a photographer whose practice is concerned with community, connection, and identity. Phil aims to examine these concepts by also drawing attention to the process of photography and its qualities, questioning the way we place value on them. Phil's focus is on long-term socially engaged projects, writing, and teaching, and I'm very pleased to see that you are able to share your screen, Phil.
It worked. Excellent.
Fantastic.
All right, let me just turn this up a bit.
20 minutes, that's now.
Fantastic. All right. Okay, so yeah, hi, my name is Phil Hill, and this is my project, More Lonely Air, which is about kind of idiorhythmic communities and this nostalgic lens. So when you walk the streets locally, so to the shops or as you're kind of commuting to work, have you seen people that make the same journey or who move in the same space as you, in front, to the side, and behind you. These people are familiar, but you do not know them. Even though they occupy the same community as you, and they may even share many of the same experiences as you. So it's a large town in the southeast of England, situated within the bounds of the M25, but it is not London. It is in Hertfordshire, but it is not the pastoral countryside of the home counties either. Its identity is closely intertwined with the way that it is designed to transport you away or through it. For the commuter, this is ideal, placing you within a stone's throw to the capital and affording you the opportunity to escape the urban sprawl when not working. It is between place. My project, or my photographic series, started as a personal investigation into connection to place, one that I have lived for the past 7 years without ever referring to as a my wife here, and my daughter was born here. With the onset of the pandemic, I found myself walking more, exploring Watford in much more detail, and noticing the imperative to keep distant. So it became an opportunity to have a dialogue and journey through this separated existence of individualism to evaluate the sanctuary, forging a new relationship with space and the people that I share it with, and challenge an identity of a commuting town where there is no more commuting. My own ideas of connection have led me to consider the way that communities have become ever more disconnected and disparate, or is that merely the perception? Watford's position as a community means that the place values the things which help people make a quick exit. So the London Orbital, the M1 train to Euston, and also Watford's position at the end of the TfL network. This identity was fundamentally challenged when the pandemic and first lockdowns. Instead of commuting out of Watford, we were encouraged to stay home in what is being referred to as the new normal, as if to contrast the past normal. Our lives have been changed, but a larger question about the way communities evolve is raised. There is a tendency to judge the present on an idealistic view of the past, longing for how things were better before, even if this has never existed. Susan Keller puts it best. The present search for community harks back to the 19th century, when in the face of rapid urbanization, one idea of community was dying and no other had yet emerged in its place. This led to human beings to construct past or to design an ideal because unrealized future. The pandemic brings this into sharp focus for everybody in an extremely we can quickly contrast the life and community that existed only a few months previously. This nostalgia associated with the way we consider the past is shaped by the way that we consume this past, which becomes abstracted and edited as we rely on the construction of personal memory, hauntological photographic reminders, in Hirsch terms, post-memory. The pandemic also highlighted community disparateness, people sharing same spaces but living separately, which seems to be a contemporary problem, but what Roland Barthes termed ideorhythm, suggesting similarities to the way that some monastic communities live within the same compound, but in one another, unless a communal worship of some kind has taken place, or how we all live according to an individual rhythm. Ideorhythm in which his idealized view of how we live together is very much related to separation and the value that he places on distance, which refers to the idea of a pathos of distance, where nobility can be defined by the way it creates separation from others with an air of remorse and alienation. And this becomes ever more prescient when under the current pandemic, nobility is defined by the need to safeguard our communities by remaining separate and distant from them. This context becomes a useful tool to investigate the community and its aptitude to evolve in a short period of time. Ideorhythm, separation, and people residing here only to travel away in a town such as Watford, creates an opportunity to apply the same concept of place, which we impact, but also impacts us. A town is A town that is between a city and a countryside encourages the question of where one stops and the other begins. Introduces the elusive concept of rurality, which is always in dispute and not easily defined, noting that there is not a single variable that can capture or rural settlements. And it also cites Weishart et al.'s 1995 study into crime and rural policing in rural and small town America, which discusses the ambiguous nature of these definitions, among other areas that quite often cross over into photographic practice, like concepts such as truth, beauty. Everybody knows the term rural, but no one can define the term very precisely. Marion Shard did, however, create a useful term to sum this up, even though ambiguity remains at its core. Edgelands, those liminal spaces existing in the human settlement that are not one thing or the other. And from this, I define Watford as an edgeland. Even before this pandemic, which created liminality for all of us, its position as a nondescript, characterless has been the topic of disdain for writers including Nick Hornby's High Fidelity, and in the political comedy The Thick of It, where it was a place to avoid and considered bleak. Both of these do not inspire reasons to reside here. And when Paul Farley and Michael Simmons Roberts made their own observations on interpreting edgelands for the book of the same name, they made special reference to the train line that runs through the town and also landmarks just outside the boundary of Watford, but not really the town itself. Watford might be two edgelands for edgelands. But by their own definition, English towns and cities where urban and rural negotiate and renegotiate their borders, in which Watford spends much of its time arguing over, for many outside, it is effectively part of the city, and to those that live here, it's defiantly not. Watford, of all the large towns, is a place engulfed by its position next to the capital, whose urban sprawl can't identify itself as anything close to being rural. And if Edgelands are always in flux, then we can infer that so too is the local community, continually evaluating and re-evaluating its sense of self as the environment changes. It's especially true in a place such as Watford, whose position as an edgeland is part of its central identity. The impact of the community changes the town and then changes the people in turn. And a pandemic, albeit unexpected, merely accelerates this process. So as a photographer, I made a number of conscious choices in the way that I represented these ideas visually. There are unique characteristics such as the environment, architecture, balance of green space to consider, which have an impact on the community that inhabit it. Graham Harman suggests that these qualities are a part of an object-orientated ontology, referring to an inanimate agency that influences human interpretation. As he notes, we abstract certain features from these objects which exist in their full and unexhausted plenitude, quite apart from all our theoretical, perceptual, or practical encounters with them. From this, it is important to understand the limitations that are created through personal bias and also technological interpretation. Photographs are also objects with their own agency, according to Harman. They also abstract from other objects by reducing reality into two-dimensional surfaces and single truths, context and interpretation dependent. The process of photographing places limitations of not only time, but also via the chemical makeup of photographic emulsions or computer-programmed methods of interpreting light. Neither can hope to fully realize the reality present, but can feed nostalgia by editing the experience of a place or time further into its idealized elements. As David Campany reminds us, the time and appearance of the photograph is inseparable from the time and appearance of the world, yet they are clearly not the same. To push this as an idea, push this idea as a way of showing my community as subjective and idealized, I made use of black and white analog photographic processes that by their very nature abstract the world as we anthropocentrically perceive it in color. Black and white specifically and uniquely presents this as a form of hauntological nostalgia in the way that it references a collective knowledge built on the canons of photography, such as the Farm Security Administration affiliates Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans' documentary aesthetic. Lange's images in particular have frequently been used as an example as the quintessential
I think we lost.
Sorry. Did you just, am I still?
Sorry, you're fine. You're fine. Sorry.
Okay, no, all good. What was I saying? Yeah, so the migrant mother image is considered a quintessential documentary photograph, despite later acknowledgements of their contrived elements and high levels of editorial control by FSA information head Roy Stryker. These images constructed an idealistic, romanticized world that may never have existed, but one that is frequently referred to through tropes of photography. When looking at black and white photographs, there is an immediate link to the photographic nature of the work. It creates nostalgia usually associated with the past and is a construction that the photograph can't be a way of learning about community. When used overtly, this can point out where it has also been used previously to the reader, leading to a re-evaluation and deconstruction of their built-up world. Photography is a pictorial format that represents through compositional editing and selection. What is important is intent and a transparency of representational values matching outcome. As Kendall L. Walton reminds us, representation without matching is simply misrepresentation. With this in mind, my images are a formalized gaze of portraits and landscapes in black and white to encourage a prolonged reading of the image. This is to present characters from my local community as heroic, much like how Florence Owens Thompson, the subject of Lange's migrant mother image, has been likened to the Madonna and Child. And then structured by narrative inspired by the Robert Frost poem, Desert Places, taking a line from this poem for the title of my work, More Lonely Air, is an antiquated way of stating you are more lonely before, effectively becoming less so the more learned about the place, the people, and the community. I made a sequence of the work using Joseph Campbell's journey narrative structure, rarely seen in a work of photography, as a way of denoting this representation through symbol and mythology, just as FSA photographers constructed part of the American myth visually, and Frost the same through his words. My sequence creates a visual representation of the community having to rediscover itself through the local places it is limited to. This idea of local discovery became very important to show how a community can evolve. There are useful metaphors in Frost's imagery that connect to the way that I have been considering community and connection in the landscape, as outlined by Li Wang's study of Frost's poem. There is the moral and spiritual wilderness in Desert Places, represented by the edgelands in my images, his woods, society, and my idea of community, the fields, which represents nature, and the home that provides safety and where one can find identity. Visually, these metaphors are designed to place focus on the people and the landscape and how it coexists. But the project was not about creating any objective truth, instead using the medium to create something in between fiction and chronicle, again linking to the liminality of the edgelands and rurality concepts. Ideorism is also a dichotomy between idealistic versus reality. And my project represents this by consciously presenting images made during a time of challenge and great stress, using photographic methods to select and edit into idealistic moments that I've constructed, a false nostalgia created in the present, which could have also been photographed at another point in time. What this shows is that even at this present time, there are moments of hope and beauty without having to rely on the subjective memories from the past. This mythologizing of the present through a metaphorical journey of discovery shows us that the romantic and ideal is inherent now and exists within the places there to be discovered.
4 minutes, Bill. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. I don't think I've got that many more. let me go to the next one. So Watford will potentially go back to its role to delivery of commuters. However, it will in the knowledge that at least one aspect of previous idiorhythms, people's individual rhythms, is now an acutely shared experience within the local community on some level. Even when you see the same faces, you might understand a little bit more about them. It is possible to use photography to create an idealistic and nostalgic view of a contemporary community, even when under the current pandemic, which leads to an opening of a dialogue to better appreciate the present. And then I will skip to the right. Thank you very much for listening to that.
Thank you so much, Phil. And I'm so sorry to interrupt. I always feel so bad when I have to indicate the time. So let me just push my camera on. I'm so so impressed by all these presentations, and I'm really, really sad that I don't have enough time to explore all the questions. And so what I think we'll do, I'll just ask the 3 questions we have in the Q&A sections. Now for all the other questions, and if we don't have time to answer all those, and I know I have plenty of questions to every single one of you, then what I suggest we do, we can continue using this chat in the networking sessions, and also with what the software provides, we can send direct messages to anyone here. So if you go to event chat, you can just create a direct message to people. And I think the reason we have to do is because, of course, we have our keynote session starting in less than 15 minutes. So I am aware that everyone needs some short break. But let me just jump to the questions we have. So the first question is for you, Rachel, and the question is from Mark Brown. And the question is, do you think subsequent documentary verbatim theatre are aware of the influence of Cheeseman?
Okay, well, thanks ever so much for the question, Mark. I think probably indirectly, they're using the traditions of the documentary, and that's been developed over time and used in lots of different ways. Actually, the way verbatim has gone now, it seems quite different to the way Cheeseman began with it, in that he was very, as I talked about, wanted to be very accurate to the representation, whereas more recent interpretations of it, so for instance, Alicky Blythe's London Road, she'll take verbatim interview, but she'll create a narrative from it. She'll play around with it to the point where it doesn't really bear a lot of resemblance to what the people said in the initial stages. So I think part of my journey, if you like, in the PhD is to try and get people more aware that actually a lot of these practices did begin with Peter Cheeseman. And so that's why I want to get his name out there a bit more and people more aware of the archive. There's just such a wealth of material there at Staff's Uni in the special collections. And there's so many ideas that he started using that perhaps people are using now, but without realizing where they originated.
Lovely. Thank you so much. The second question is for you, Tom, and that's from Sharon. And the question is, what more can be done to support collective spaces?
Thanks, Agatha. Thanks for the question, Sharon. It's a tricky question. I think certainly over the last year in Medellin, it's become more difficult to get support and funding for these sorts of spaces. I think there was an assumption that due to the pandemic and the lockdown and people being enclosed at home, that these processes didn't need funding. And I think there's a longer term trend in Medellin of not wanting to fund this sort of alternative media and these sorts of spaces that perhaps don't fit into the logic that the Medellin government has had for a number of years now in terms of trying to drive tourism or trying to drive economic development or pacification. Mi Comuna doesn't fit into that logic. The Casa doesn't fit into that logic. So I guess what could we do? You know, there's often with funding in the UK, it's tricky in terms of funding not wanting to pay for rent of spaces when actually spaces are really important to have, and we often have to find funding for projects that then can kind of indirectly keep these spaces open. The same with grassroots media. There's very little support for membership media like the Bristol Cable and other grassroots media. So I guess if we're in contact with these sorts of funders, then it's kind of putting pressure on them to be maybe more flexible with the things that they fund. And yeah, I guess looking up mikomunados.com and there'll be campaigns and fundraisers coming out soon. So I'll stop there because we don't have much time, I think, Agatha.
Yeah,
that's helpful.
Thank
Thanks,
you so much. I will be in touch with all of you following this panel, and I will come up with I want to ask you my questions and kind of discuss any kind of follow-up activities after this panel, because I think it was really fascinating. And as I said before, there's so many things, even though you've all been talking about very different kind of communities and different places and in different contexts and in different times. I think there's lots of very interesting themes which kind of link them together. So I'll definitely be in touch. Very, very quickly, Rachel, if you can answer this in like 1 minute, I would be really grateful. There's a question for you which asks, what do you think the key to local voices in local theatre is? And there's one question to Dahi, and then we have to wrap it up afterwards.
Okay, so I'll go super speedy. I think the key is a bit like Nikki was talking about earlier on, really, is that involvement from the very beginning of the participants all the way through, so that they have that ownership of being involved and being connected to the project all the way through. And a bit like Dahi was saying about making sure that then that project doesn't just become part of a university, but actually goes back out and has an impact, a wider impact for the community. And I think that's the most important, really.
Thank you. And Dahi, the last one for you. Can you tell us something about how you're preserving and sharing the audio recordings?
Oh, that I'm keeping the recordings because they're, we've gone through ethical clearance and everything else. I need to maintain them and can't just hand them over to anyone. So they are protected in that regard. But, we've got the permission for public dissemination. So what we're going to do is share them. One of my slides there towards the end was talking about public dissemination and exhibits, and hopefully next St. Patrick's Week in March 2022, we'll have a public exhibition in Derby. We'll be able to show the 26-minute film, but also being able to show individual clips in an exhibit where people can come and interact on an iMac or tablets and be able to watch them, so that again it's open, people experience it and be able to come and engage with it, learn about it, and of all generations, so bringing children and people of all diverse backgrounds as well, so that it is really something that everybody can learn from. So that's the plan, really, and to try to share it and expand it too and do more recordings of it. So watch this space.
Lovely. Again, thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating. I'm so pleased, to hear all your presentations, and thank you, because I know you're here from different time zones. Thank you, Tom. That's a nod towards your direction here. So I'll be in touch with all of you at some point next week. And once again, thank you. And I'll see you in about 5-10 minutes in the next session, which is our next keynote speaker. So thank you so much, and I'll see you around.
Great.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure.
Hello, everybody. The morning panel number 2, representation and visibility. And I'm the chair. My name is Piotr Szuda, and I'm from Kazimierz Wielki University in Bydgoszcz, Poland. I'm a media scholar and sociology scholar. So I have the opportunity to chair this wonderful panel, and we have 3 speakers today. But before we start with the first paper, I would like to just give you a brief description of some ground rules. So be aware that you have strictly 20 minutes to present your paper, and I will be like keeping track of the time, and I could give you a gentle cue 5 minutes before your time is up. So be aware that you must keep track of the time as well. I will use the chat to signal that 5 minutes before your time is over. When it comes to questions and answer Q&A session, we have this Q&A section visible on the panel, so please feel free to use the Q&A section during the speeches, and but we will get back to these questions toward the end. So let's hear the presentations first. Okay, are you ready? Let's start then. The first speaker is Maciej Wodziński from Maria Curie Skłodowska University. And Maciej is a PG student of philosophy at the Doctoral School of Humanities at Maria Curie Skłodowska University in Lublin, Poland. And he is currently running his own 4-year research project on social stereotypes and limitation in expert knowledge regarding autism spectrum disorders. And this project is part of the so-called Diamond Grant. This is a program of the Polish Ministry of Science. And Maciej will be talking about the image of people on the autism spectrum in movies and TV series. There you go, Maciej. Please feel free to share your thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I will try to share my screen now. Just give me a second. As Piotr has said, I'm a PhD candidate and in philosophy, and my main interest is actually in autism and some epistemic processes that social processes that let's say shape the public opinion on the autism, and that's why my project is not only limited to philosophy itself, but in general it goes more in a social sciences direction, and that's why I would like to say today to you about how these different discourses that we can see in media, academia, and some institutions, how they shape the identity or the process of identity creation and construction of people on the spectrum. So first, I will say a few words about how the discourses impact the identity in general, discourses in general. After that, I will say how the contemporary discourses look about autism spectrum and these main narratives look like, and how specifically in the area of movies and TV shows, autism was depicted in the past and how it is depicted now, and how these two different kind of narratives, how they impact the way the autistic identity is constructed.
Could you stop for a while? Could you please share the full view, because I think that it would be much more visible than.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
It's great.
Is it fine now? All right. So first of all, as we probably all are aware of, the influence of many different discourses that we can see in the reality around us, the influence of these discourses on the social perception of different phenomena is huge, of course, and this is because the discourse, which we could define as a group of sense-making social practices that explain the reality to the members of the society, and we internalize a lot of categories and notions that we from these discourses that we view the world around us with, and this specifically this sense-making component is important here because it helps us to build and maintain the so-called a coherent picture of the reality. So these categories which we internalize from many different narrations about different phenomena, they're strictly connected with our roles in the society and our own thinking about ourselves in the society. So this influence, simply put, I think we could say is can be done in two ways: the direct one and indirect one. The direct way of how the discourse influence on the process of identity creation is about how people, in this case with autism, think about themselves when they are influenced by the particular discourse. And the other one, the indirect way, is how the rest of the society think about themselves, about people with autism. And the way we perceive ourselves, of course, it has a great impact on our roles in the society, of our whole network of the relation with the other members of the society. So those categories that we internalize from discourses around us, they are not neutral for how we think about ourselves and about other people, and especially in groups like people with autism or similar situation, like with groups from some minorities. This impact is actually might be crucial here. So today we have two dominant and hegemonic narratives about autism. Of course, different discourses from they are different from each other. So the different discourse will be, we can observe in the media. A different one is at the academia, or a different one is at our families and friends and etc. But we can observe two main categories of how autism is, let's say, depicted today. And the first one is medical discourse. It means that autism in this area is shown as a result of some malfunction of organism, and it is shown, depicted, and spoken of like about the in medical categories, like it is a mental health disorder, and it is in the opposition to the more contemporary self-advocacy narratives. And the other one, which is more general than the medical one, which we could call a deficit-based narration or deficit-based discourse. It is autism in this discourse is shown as a cause of some great life sufferings. People with autism are shown as like they suffer the lifelong they have some lifelong difficulties resulting from autism. But what is important and common with these two discourses is that they perceive people with autism that like they were some kind broken, and they need to be fixed, and they need to be fit into the rest of the society. And this is the opposition to the most contemporary narratives of, for example, self-advocacy movements, which try to show us that autism today shouldn't be seen as some form of deficit, but it should be seen as a different mode of human condition. Unfortunately, this is of course not a good thing, but unfortunately, those two narratives are the most popular in the media and especially in the discourse of academical researchers. When we read analysis of movies from, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago, like Rain Man, Mercury Rising, or K-Pax, we can see that people on the autism spectrum, they are shown there as some kind of bizarre curiosity or some a little bit mysterious characters, but they are mostly shown as a background for the protagonists, which are not on the autism spectrum. What is also common in this, let's say, old or past depictions of autism is that there is no any inner life shown in the, or any self-development which we could observe through the movie of the character with autism. And of course, most of these characters have some special abilities, like genius mathematical minds, but what is important here, these special abilities of these people, they are not, they are shown like some kind of a tool made for resolving specific task in the movie. So they are not put, those special abilities, they are not put in the movie to show the some exceptionality of the character, but they are there just to make the observer a little bit more curious about what is going on in the movie. So we could say that those old depictions of autism, they are not about people with autism, but they are about autism itself. So the person with autism actually is not important in those old narratives. But to be a little bit more optimistic, today we have shows and movies created with much greater awareness of this impact of the particular image of autism on the social perception of this phenomena. And we can also we can see that protagonists are individuals on the spectrum. We can also observe that they are not like emotionless machines like in these old narratives, but they have rich inner lives. They're even if they have some special abilities, those abilities are actually there to show some inner exceptionality of this particular character. And what is more really important in these new depictions of autism, like we could see in the movie Adam or the new TV show, quite new TV show, Atypical, they show the point of view of a person with autism, and they are, we could say, they are made to make people aware of the differences between neurotypical people and people on the spectrum. So, so these new depictions are much more, let's say, sophisticated, and they show people with autism in the let's say optic of difference, not in this old optic of deficit. And what is here also important, they emphasize the role of the social environment, and the goal of these new depictions, in my opinion, is to make the other members of the society more aware of what they can do to change our reality to be a place, just a better place for people with different needs. And now let's try to think and to imagine what could be or how could look the constructed identity of a person with autism when it was impacted with these two very different, let's say, old and new discourse about autism. On the one hand, we would have a person who thinks about him or herself as someone who is broken in some way, who needs to be fixed, who needs to be treated, and who needs to be cured. And the rest of the society, of course, based on such an image like in these old movies, would see that such a person as someone who is, let's say, miserable, who is suffering through the whole course of life. It would see also such a person as, let's say, emotionless. So there is no inner life in this person. So this old image would influence the relationship between the, let's say, neurotypical part of the society and the people or individual on the spectrum. While in this, on the other hand, in this new narrative, we would change these categories to emphasize the not a deficit optic, but a difference optic. So we would end up with identity constructed with categories like I'm a difference, not a. I'm a different person, not a. It doesn't mean that I'm worse. And we could see in the such statements in many of the researchers that engage the people on the spectrum. So these narratives about how people see them on the spectrum, see themselves in this deficit optic is quite a popular thing and quite a common thing today. So these categories, when they are implemented in many different discourses, like the movie one or the media or some press discourse, they actually translate to very real ways in how people on the spectrum see the relations or the whole net of relations between them and the rest of the society, and how, on the other hand, the society places people on the spectrum within or outside or inside of the society. So what is important here, I think, is to be aware that this picture of autism spectrum, I think it will never be perfect. We have to be aware that just it is impossible to show such a variety of people, of characters, and of just many different modes of human condition, which we call today autism spectrum. It's just not impossible to show them in one, let's say, set of TV shows or even in one movie. We just have to be aware that this image will not be perfect, but contemporary analysis of movies and TV shows, they show us that there are some specific stereotypes or oversimplification that we should be, and the creators of these movies and shows should be just aware of and try to avoid the most popular and harmful simplification and stereotypes. So it's important to remember that this picture will never be perfect, but there is a lot we can do to change it and to impact in a right way those processes of social and individual identity creation and construction of people with on the autism spectrum. So at the end, just a few words about what can we do with those narratives, how they should be prepared and how they should be done. I think the first let's say clue what to do with those narratives, the first and the most important one is to be aware that that form of responsibility of this image constructed of this group of people, that to be aware that we are responsible for the image that is constructed, and that this image, it's not just a movie picture. It really translates into the real life, and it really translates to this process and interfere with this process of social identity construction. And we could see this that these categories from especially from the media discourse, they really we can see it in the first person let's say letters from people on the spectrum, that those categories really influence the way they see about themselves as a group, as a member of a group labeled autistic or labeled as disordered or mental disorder. Yep.
Your time is up, so please be short.
Okay, so just summing up, the community of people who are involved in the process of these movies and TV shows creation just should, in my opinion, this community should first of all include the perspective and the view of the world of people on the spectrum, and try to employ this view in their work, not just not only to stay with the view of with the third person view. So what we can do, I think the most important thing we can do is to include people on the spectrum in the process of the of the creation of movies, articles, researchers, etc. So that's basically all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maciej. As said before, we will get back to the questions. There are some questions for you right now. We will get back to them at the end. And the second speaker is Megan Robinson. I believe Megan is here. Yes, she is. Feel free to give a speech. Megan is from University of Cambridge. Megan completed her master's in philosophy in social anthropology at the University of Cambridge in September 2020. Her dissertation reached how indigenous Shipibo, I hope I pronunciate right, communities curate their identity politics within global political networks and contemporary art settings. And her paper will pertain to Shipibo community as well. So Megan, feel free to present your paper.
Thank you everyone for letting me speak at this conference. It's so interesting to hear what you're all speaking about, and I feel really grateful to be here. I'm Megan. This presentation is about Shipibo art curated as outsider art at the Outsider Art Fair in New York, and how I hope to suggest that communities can be thought of as a curation of different elements across ontological mediums brought into relations of care. This is a painting by Shipibo artist Sarah Flores as part of the exhibition. I'll start by introducing myself a little bit. I recently graduated from an MPhil in social anthropology at Cambridge. My research looked at the indigenous Shipibo community living in the Peruvian Amazon. I was looking at the Shipibos' political and artistic practices and how the two intersect and are underscored by a shamanic logic running throughout. The Shipibo are a Panoan-speaking indigenous group of around 30,000, settled mainly along the Ucayali River in Peru. They make up less than 1% of the national population, but have emerged amongst indigenous groups as a dominant cultural and political force. They have strong relationships with non-Shipibo outsiders, conducting political initiatives with non-Peruvian organizations such as the UN, exporting their art for curation in international galleries, and attracting huge influxes of tourism who come to the Shipibo for shamanic healing, which utilizes ayahuasca and art in its practice. In my research, I looked at the Shipibos' relationship with outsiders. The main outsider interlocutor I worked with was the Shipibo Kanibo Center, a New York-based NGO working within both the political and artistic realms with the Shipibo. The center provides funding for Koshikoks, the representative political body of the Shipibo. They also support the Shipibo with their interactions with the UN and help to translate the Shipibos' political aims into language that is recognizable and salient with non-Shipibo communities. They also provide a platform to promote the political goals of the Shipibo. The centre are also heavily engaged in artistic support, curating Shipibo art in international gallery settings, including the Outsider Art Fair in New York. In this presentation today, I'll be discussing the Shipibo community and how it can be thought of as a community that incorporates human and non-human elements and extends past both the geographical boundaries and ontological mediums from Ucayali all around the world and through different mediums, including sound, film, and textiles. The Shipibo community is essentially shamanic in nature, which itself is a practice which is concerned with traversing ontological boundaries. Art is used by the Shipibo to translate ontological differences and mediate the relationships between human and non-human entities. The same shamanic logic is inflected in political practice, with shamanism utilized to translate perspectives between different entities, such as between the Shipibo and the UN. In this talk today, I'll be focusing primarily on an exhibition curated as part of the Outsider Art Fair in 2020, as a means through which to demonstrate how shamanic logic inflects Shipibo art, and how from this we can come to expand and redefine the concept of community as something that is not necessarily only human, nor necessarily bounded in space, time, or singular ontology. Instead, a community is both material and virtual. It exists in bodies and mediums, but also across ontological boundaries, space, time, and sound. I put forward a phenomenological approach to understanding communities and explore what kinds of care and action is possible in the world when we take community phenomenologically. When I was running through my presentation with my friends, I was asked to explain a bit about what I mean by ontology and phenomenology. I'll offer a brief explanation if anyone isn't familiar with the terms, and I apologise for doing these huge concepts a massive disservice in my oversimplification. I refer to ontology as the study of being and what exists. When I speak about different ontological mediums or perspectives, I refer to the differences in the constitution of beings, giving rise to very different ways of being in and seeing the world. For example, to the Shipibo, a human and a jaguar inhabit different ontologies due to their different bodily constitutions. In Western modernity, however, it's held that we see the human body and the earth as on an ontological continuum because we're both made up of the same materials. However, what is distinct about the human is our interiority, which makes communication to moderns with other beings, such as trees or plants, impossible. By phenomenology, I refer to Heidegger's phenomenological approach that doesn't take an absolute distinction between self and world. Rather, reality is produced through a sensuous engagement with our material world. Our experience of consciousness arises not because of a discrete mind inside a body, separate to the world, but produced through interactions between entities in the world, from the shape of our skull to our DNA, the lamp on our desk, the computer screen in front of us, and the people we interact with. I'll start by speaking about shamanism and art amongst the Shipibo and how they intersect. Shipibo shamans work as healers for the local community and tourists. They also produce art and music as part of their shamanic practice. Shamans go into the forest to diet on certain plants which are thought to have a mother, which can be translated as personhood. Shamans will diet on these plants whilst adhering to strict practices, limiting consumption of certain foods and contact with humans. They ingest ayahuasca, an entheogenic brew made from the ayahuasca vine and chacruna plant. Ayahuasca is the means through which shamans can communicate with non-human beings in their environment, including animals and plants. It serves to facilitate connection across ontological boundaries. Shamans create, conduct, and manage relationships with non-human beings during ayahuasca ceremony by singing Icaros, songs that emerge spontaneously through the process of dieting a particular plant, aided by ayahuasca. These songs are patterns which order the cosmological world encompassing the human and non-human. They are means through which entities can be brought into relation and relationships can be managed. These songs also act as patterns which, when sung to a patient during healing, become imprinted on the patient's body, restoring order. In this way, the cosmological order directly relates to the order of the individual body, with Icaros serving as a means to order and thus bring into harmony both the body and wider cosmology. Well-being can therefore be seen as dependent on a harmonious ordering between the self and its relationship to the world. I thought it might be useful to play a quick video of a curandero, which is a local term for shaman singing in Icaro. He works at the Temple of the Way of Light, which caters to foreigners for ayahuasca healings. I hope that you can hear this. I hope this counts as screen sharing, so please let me know if you can't hear this video. I think that of what they sound like. So the songs themselves are seen as patterns, and they'll then get mediated in the form of art in those patterns that you see behind him on the textiles. That's known as kene, and that's a physical representation of the pattern of the Icaros. But to call it a representation is quite misleading because it's more than a representation. It is also an active agent in generating healing and cosmological relationships. So I'll just go back. This is also a kene print from the Outsider Art Fair by Sarah Flores. The shamanic network mediated through the kene print has been further extended through the curation of Sarah Flores artwork at the Outsider Art Fair in New York. In an exhibition exhibition entitled The Projective Drawing, curated by the Shipibo Kinibo Center and Brett Littman. Sarah Flores is an Indigenous Shipibo woman, healer, and political activist. She creates the work through shamanic practices of fasting, abstaining from certain activities, and dieting from particular plants in the forest, and using natural forest medium for the dye. The exhibition featured the work alongside a microphone and headphones, which the audience would put on and hear a recording of the Amazon forest. Viewers were encouraged to interpret the Kene prints as sound by producing a sound through the microphone, which would then have an effect on the sound of the forest coming through the headphones. The effect was an immersive, interactive soundscape of patterns, sound, environment, and form, with each element affecting the other. The word technology has roots in Greek technologia, meaning systematic treatment of art and craft. Technology, like culture and community making, can be seen as an experimental craft, forming relations along networks reminiscent of a Kene pattern. This piece signals the bringing together of several elements across ontological mediums in a network, from the forest to its inhabitants, to the Shipibo, to receivers of art in the exhibition, and across different mediums such as sound, form, all that stuff. Translating and reshaping the network. However, importantly, the exhibition was curated as part of the Outsider Art Fair. The Shipibo remain outsiders to contemporary art. The phenomenological network model I've depicted here is bounded by the Shipibo viewed as outsiders by the gaze of contemporary art. However, it is precisely the categorization as outsider that allows the Shipibo's art and political practice to have such efficacy. It is politically salient for the Shipibo to highlight what makes them different to us, their culture, customs, dress, and art for many reasons. Firstly, this difference translates as rights under the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, which calls for Indigenous peoples to be a separate, distinct body of people and continuous customs and culture, distinct from the larger nation within which they're a part. In the art world, the idea of the other or outsider is an evocative and sought after ideal, or as one of my interlocutors said, the art world is like a vampire. It eats its young and wants new bodies it hasn't seen before. This brings to mind Hegel's master-slave dialectic, the struggle between the self and the other to assert self-consciousness. It is unclear whether the art world is casting the Shipibo and cannibalizing them, or whether it's the Shipibo appropriating us. The Kene model, by incorporating differences and relations between human and non-human entities, orders the wider cosmology, and through its expansion in new settings, such as the contemporary art space, allows for the incorporation of the Western other into this framework, the indigenization of modernity rather than the modernization of the indigenous, perhaps. Whilst this question is left ambiguous and open, what we're left with is a concept of community and care that we can explore to generate productive relationships, not only between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, but our wider ecology that includes human and non-human entities. If we think of community as Kene, community becomes an open-ended, expansive network of relationships between different entities spanning ontological, human, and non-human mediums. It incorporates differences rather than working against them. Community becomes less of a bounded identity tied to time, place, or similarity, but an assemblage incorporating differences. It also makes us think of how different mediums can be used for healing. In recent years, the Shipibo have grown in their use of film as a media for self-representation. There's now a national Shipibo Film Festival showcasing Shipibo films and a film training school for young people. The film Icaros, A Vision is a film produced by the Shipibo Kinibo Center in their work with the Shipibo. It uses sound and vision to not only showcase the shamanic logic of Kene running throughout, but operates on the idea that the receiver of the film, the viewer, is part of the network of relationships, with the film acting as a way to order relations between makers and receivers to generate wider healing effects. Just as pattern in both form and sound is utilized for healing and shamanic healing, film as a medium can extend Kene in growing. Film as a medium to extend Kene is growing amongst the Shipibo, and it opens questions of how film can be agentive in generating healing. With this in mind, we can think of the etymology of the word community. Community comes from the Latin communis, meaning common, and itas, meaning a state of being. Communis is then further broken down into com, meaning a bringing together of several objects, and munis, meaning duty and obligation. We can think of community as a bringing together of diverse elements into relationships of duty and obligation or care. To curate also means to care for, pointing to a semblance between community and curation. Community becomes a bringing together of entities traversing ontological and spatio-temporal mediums into relationships of care. A model of community that takes an ontological, networked approach opens up more possibilities for care and has the potential to underlie approaches not only to art and curation, but political action and ecological practice. My concluding hope would that I've given some insight into Shipibo shamanism in art and politics, and that I hope to generate dialogue about what's meant by the term community and the potential productivity of understanding community from the perspective of Shipibo shamans as a network of different entities into relations of care. Modernity has presented us with two choices. One, there is either no essence, or two, essence is elsewhere, found in structures like capital, atoms, or the unconscious. These two choices have paralyzed our ability to attend to the earth. The third option is there is an essence, and it is right here in the objects resplendent with sensual qualities, operating in what Tim Morton calls an interobjective relationship, a network of relationships between entities with each one affecting the other. When we attend to entities in this way, our community expands and opens up and draws out new possibilities for care. Thank you.
Anna is her PhD. She's the so-called habilitacja in Polish. She has habilitacja. She's an associate professor at the Faculty of Journalism, Information and Book Studies at the University of Warsaw. And her academic interests are media marketing, especially publishing multi-platforms, and fear of missing out. She conducted some nice research on the subject. And she's an author of numerous academic papers on media studies, marketing communication, fear of missing out, and so on. So if you could give us your presentation, we will gladly hear what you have to say. So here you go.
Okay, I'm trying to share my screen with you. Please let me know, do you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Sure.
Don't count the time. 1 minute. Okay, right now, start. Hello, hi everybody. My name is Anna Jupowicz-Ginarska, as Piotr introduced me, and today I would like to talk about the interconnections between visual representations of LGBT plus community in Poland, media polarization, and the magazine's editorial policies. This is the agenda of my today's presentation. It is very short, but the presentation itself is just a little bit longer, so maybe I will move forward to the theoretical framework of my research. So the basic question is why media polarization is so important. I would say because of its effects, which are strictly connected with political and social polarization. And all of these effects can be described as a negative towards journalists' credibility, ethical standards, and professional solidarity between the media, but also among the society, especially in the context of, I would say, deepening the divisions and isolating these opposite camps. Of course, these are some examples of academic references to media polarization, because the literature is very rich in this context, and it becomes richer and richer with every month, I would say. But from Helin and Mancini to prior, it can be observed that the described phenomena is connected with the, I would say, politicization of the media, biased reporting, and ideologization of news and opinions. But the fundament of my research is a study conducted by Głowacki and Kuś 2 years ago. These scholars offered the definition of media polarization, the levels of media polarization, and 4P formula. Here you can see this division into structural and behavioral level of media polarization, when the structural, I would say, refers to a kind of systematic nature, when the behavioral ones refers to content. And I will focus on the content aspect today. And here also you've got this before mentioned 4P formula, which allows to distinguish media polarization from simple, I would say, pluralism of opinions. So, in order to diagnose whether we deal with the media polarization or not, we should answer these questions. If the answer is yes, it can be stated that we deal with media polarization. So this is a very nice quotation from Bartosz Głowacki, Polish journalist. Also 2 years ago, he wrote that Polish media passionately fight each other in the name of political and cultural war between Poland and Poland. And I think that I will prove that this is an issue in Poland in the next slides of my presentation. So I would say that Polish socio-political media are defined by their general pro or anti-government approach. So liberal and left-wing media, despite their not uncritical attitude towards the government opposition, are clearly against the ruling coalition. Thus, are being also politicized. Right-wing conservative media are pro-governmental. They also belong to so-called identity media trend, which is very specific to Polish reality. And they are also highly partisan and political dependent. So I would say that it also refers to weakening political culture in Poland and the lack of critical assessment of media content. And to my mind, I have this nice quotation here that Poland is divided into socio-political tribes. Each of them owns its own media, which radically attacked the opponents. So I choose the LGBT plus community topic because, and there are some effects, because there is about 2 million LGBT people in Poland, so it's 5% of the Polish population. In last year, an annual report by ILGA Europe ranked Poland as the most homophobic country in the European Union. More than 1/3 of Poland's territory is now occupied by so-called LGBT plus free zones. It's about 30% of Poles, and these are the areas covered by a resolution declaring that this particular area is free of LGBT ideology. So the European Parliament 2 years ago stated that the creation of these zones constitutes an extremely discriminatory measure. So LGBT plus was also a weapon, a political weapon used by conservative parties against liberal opposition during the presidential and parliamentary elections. For example, the United Right candidate, current president, said about LGBT plus community that they are not people, they are ideology. And Archbishop Jędraszewski described LGBT plus as rainbow plague and compared it to the red plague and cholera plague. So there are quite controversial stances formulated by Polish officials. So what do Poles think about it? I conducted, along with Ariadna panel, nationwide research referring to the minorities basically in Poland, and we asked to what extent are you or not personally tolerant of the LGBT plus people, and as you can see 70% of respondents said that they are not tolerant to this community. But when we look particularly at the electoral preferences, you can say that right at the bottom of this table that the United Right, this is the ruling camp, says in almost 40% that they are not tolerate, or rather not tolerate towards LGBT plus community. When we combined it with the type of the media they like to read or reach for, there can be a very interesting conclusions from this fact, which I will also refer to it in the final part of my presentation. So these are the research questions. I will focus mainly on the visual aspects of LGBT community, and the methodology. The research sample was based on a structural level of media polarization, which is expressed by media editorial policies. Except policies, also a financial issue should be mentioned, and it turns out that within last few years the right right-wing media have received higher advertising revenue due to the support of state companies, whereas liberal and left-wing media have gained lesser support. I conducted qualitative, quantitative, comparative content analysis on the front covers because they are considered to be one of the most important part of the magazine, but also because they are, as literature says, a kind of postcards from the past, the commentaries from the past. I studied covers, making cover stories and supportive cover stories from within 5 years. And this date 2015 is very important because this is the date of the start of the United Right rule in Poland. Then this is the first table that I would like to share with you. As you can see, I studied more than 10,000 cover stories, and this is the division between major cover stories and supportive cover stories. Maybe not the quantitative aspect is very visible here. It's not a huge amount of cover stories, but the content and the quality of this content is very important here. So it's also interesting to look at the temporal distribution of LGBT plus references on the front covers. As you can see, in 2019 and 2020, there are peaks of these references, and it is connected with parliament. This is the date of parliamentary and presidential elections in Poland. But when we focus on the visual aspects of LGBT cover stories, you can see that especially right-wing media, conservative media, these are Sieci, Do Rzeczy, and Gazeta Polska, were really interested and really focused on this topic and on these issues. Also, you can see that they used or reached for the supportive cover stories more often than the Polityka and Newsweek, which are liberal media. And I would say that the supportive cover stories enhanced the media's opinion regarding the LGBT plus communities. And these are the first conclusions regarding the quantitative aspect of my studies. More references during the electoral periods, both in liberal media and conservative media can be confirmed, but also there is a lesser scale of LGBT visualizations in liberal media and bigger scale in the conservative ones. But we could skip this quantitative aspects of my study and focus on the covers itself. When referring to Polityka, we may say that it focuses on politics and societal issues. And this cover on your left is very nice because this black person is Jarosław Kaczyński, who is a leader of the United Camp, and you can say that he just tries to fight with this nice view of Warsaw, which is the capital of Poland, of course, and the Warsaw is beautiful with the rainbow over it. Of course, rainbow is a symbol of LGBT plus community, and there's a political issue here because first of all, it is the reference to the electoral campaign. Second of all, Warsaw is considered to be one of the most tolerant cities in Poland towards LGBT plus community. And third of all, it is also a city which does not support the ruling camp currently. So there's many levels in this graphic content here, basically politicized. Here the cover in the middle also is being politicized. It refers to the presidential elections, and it's also a kind of a symbol because this man here in the water is the United Right camp candidate, current President Andrzej Duda, who had some troubles in winning the elections. So this rainbow symbol here is a kind of symbol of political support, and using the LGBT plus community as an electoral weapon who would support Andrzej Duda in winning the presidential elections. Also, many different connections with politics here you can be observed here. When going to Newsweek, we can see that Newsweek does not reach for the symbols of the rainbow, for example, but it focuses mainly on portraits or simply presentations of human figures. And on your left side, you can see LGBT plus representatives who are also politicians, Polish politicians. On your right side, you can see also LGBT representative, a Polish writer. It's worth to read the titles because the LGBT community representatives say or confirm that they are being threatened, they are intimidated by the ruling camp. When you look at the middle of this slide, you can see a reference to Polish president's family and also a quite interesting comparison between a very Catholic home and warning against gender, leftism, and liberty and backwardness. So this is a very interesting, or maybe from a different angle. The graphics and the words really comply themselves. So we're going to the right-wing media or conservative media. These are the representation of opposition politicians. For example, first transsexual politician who took part in works of Polish parliament. And you can see there's a kind of huge mockery on his orientation. No, it's obvious, I'm not going to translate it, but on your right side, this is Rafał Trzaskowski, and he was a counter-candidate for Andrzej Duda in last year's presidential elections. And you can see that he's described as an extremist. Also, you can see that he wears a kind of, I would say, militia symbol, and this is the rainbow on his left arm. Very controversial and also visually subjectified. Also, LGBT plus community regarding the visual issues is compared with a threat on a church, on a faith, on a Jesus Christ, and as you can see on Archbishop Jędraszewski. I would say that the choice of pictures and visuals that surround Archbishop Jędraszewski, who said about the rainbow flag, I would like to remind you, is also very instrumental and highly subjectivizing the LGBT community. Then we got the societal topics regarding the LGBT plus community. And for example, you can see that, please read the titles. LGBT plus is compared here to a threat to Poland, to independence of Poland. It's presented here as a kind of attack on our independence, but also it's a kind of attack on the children. And there is a huge suggestion here, insinuation that LGBT deals with pedophilia, with rapes, with children abuse, with human traffic. So to my mind, it was very shocking. I was very shocked by reading these titles and studying these visuals. Also, the readers of the Sieci are warned that gender ideology is not a myth. At the end, it is enslavement. When we refer to Do Rzeczy, which is also right-wing conservative and identity media magazine, we can also see huge references to Rafał Trzaskowski once more here, and he's hidden under rainbow umbrella just because of he openly support LGBT plus community. What is more, he is the current president of Warsaw, which I also mentioned earlier. This is a very nice reference to US elections, and the title, Will the Rainbow Battering Ram from Washington Hit Warsaw? And this is the supportive cover stories. You can see Joe Biden here. Then we've got society society issues, for example. This is the journalist of Do Rzeczy who bites the rainbow LGBT plus community flag. And on your right, you can see that this is the investigation of Do Rzeczy, who informs or warns before the warns of rainbow militias. So you can see that the LGBT community here is presented as a kind of I don't know, maybe even terrorist, because you have this danger included here on the cover. Then we have Gazeta Polska. It is also a right-wing conservative media, and once more Rafał Trzaskowski, who is a Equality Parade candidate, and also he is a patron of desecration that Gazeta Polska, which Gazeta Polska states. This is a photo from the huge demonstrations of Polish women which were against the United Right camp, and also a kind of union between Polish Catholic Church and the ruling camp. So this is a very symbolic cover. Also, the LGBT plus community here is presented as a threat once more to Polish Catholics and to Polish Church, and this is a very interesting cover which is filled with the symbolism. They will break their teeth on Poland again, but just let us look at the cover when the rainbow snake and the red snake, of course, are the symbols of LGBT plus community and communism. And from the other side, snake is a symbol of Satan. So we got several levels of symbolism here. And the society issues, once more referring to the children. Then we've got quite a subjectified choice of visuals, a guide to a madness of LGBT ideology. And this is a very interesting information. I'm heading to an end. Yes, I'm heading to an end. And this is the reference to a sticker which was inserted in Gazeta Polska issue. It was LGBT symbol crossed out, LGBT-free zone, it stated. And the conclusions, we may say that the liberal media are more nuanced and balanced with visuals, means of expression when referring to representative of LGBT community. It focuses, for example, in music on portraits, rarely visually balanced when referring to the ruling camp. So it is quite politicized too. But when we look at the conservative media, I would say it's extremely emotional. There are no attempts to keep neutral atmosphere or to remain balanced. It's strong, highly biased and aggressive graphical content. There are insinuations, negative emotions, exaggerations, suggestions, deviousness, perversion, and there are also some sexual references, as you could see. So I would say that the liberal media enhanced the media polarization in a moderate scale, especially in the political context. It was obvious. But the conservative media unambiguously reinforced the media polarization, I would say, in all the contexts, of course, when we refer to LGBT plus community. And thank you for your attention. That would be all. Thank you.
Let me first say that we have heard some extraordinary and very interesting speeches. And Maciej, well, I think this is huge when it comes to, maybe let's just share our cameras, all the presenters. It would be, I think, quite nice that we could see each other once again. So yeah, how about let me just comment for a while and then we will Q&A. Well, I think, Maciej, this is huge when it comes to entertainment education, something that I am into it myself. And when I think that you have shown that different shows and films have this huge entertainment education potential when it comes to the making people aware about autism, and you have elaborated on this. Well, when it comes to Anna, well, not so nice stats about Polish people and Polish media, unfortunately, but we know this from our everyday life. This is quite interesting. Well, you showcase this clash of right-wing versus left-wing media, referring to LGBTQ plus community. The last speech, well, incredibly interesting exploration of this indigenous Shipibo shamanic identities and communities, and how these shamanic curation networks can be considered as virtual communities, something very, very interesting. There are some questions for you. There are a lot of questions for you, actually. I will maybe I will just read some of them, and I will moderate the discussion. Well, the first question for Maciej is, what positive change can filmmakers make in order to ensure realistic depictions of people with autism? Yeah, what positive change can filmmakers make in order to ensure realistic depictions of people with autism? And I think what kind are they presented within the media, right? So I think you have elaborated on this, but if you could just somehow answer.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, the most important thing, in my opinion, is to consult the community, with the community of people on the spectrum. If you want to make a show that touches this issue, I think it's crucial to avoid some most harmful stereotypes and some most harmful simplifications, which are not avoided actually in those new productions. They are there, but those most harmful and well, we could say they are gone. But those new productions are not free from these the most popular stereotypes on autism. But well, so first thing is to consult the community, how they would like to show them on the screen. So that's the one, and the second one, I would say it's a good idea just to employ actors on the spectrum. So maybe it would help to show more accurately how people on the spectrum perceive reality, and so these are two main points I would recommend.
Okay, you have pointed out some examples, right? The newest, the oldest series, TV shows, and well, the whole point is that we are, or the creators of these TV shows or films, they are getting better when it comes to presenting the disease, the autism. But it's not a disease, the autism. There's people with autism in spectrum. Well, Bas, more questions for you. I don't know if the previous question was asked by Stephanie. I don't know if there is some kind of way to respond. So please, I will just go to the next one. Well, actually, these are two asked by Kinga Rogowska. The first one is, how can you look at characters that present features stereotypically associated with people on the spectrum, but the film show doesn't touch on this matter, like, for example, Big Bang Theory, because the Sheldon, the main character, is, well, we can hear that he was he was diagnosed, but nothing came up, right? So this is the first question.
Mm-hmm. I think it's not so important to whether the filmmakers declare openly that the character is on the spectrum. What is important, like with the Sheldon here, he was actually, let's say, diagnosed by fans and by a fan community. There was never said in the show that he's on the spectrum, or that he has an Asperger's syndrome. But what is important here is whether the filmmakers, if they are already aware that people see a particular character as diagnosed with autism, whether they will take this responsibility to avoid these oversimplifications, and whether we'll insert some let's say demystification points in the show. So it's not. I think it's not so important that the character is declared as diagnosed with anything.
Yeah, the fans did speculate on this. So this is this entertainment education potential I was talking about. Yeah. So very interesting. But Kinga also asked another question. Is it possible to fairly depict characters on the spectrum in films or series if the character is played by a neurotypical actor? So there was a lot of criticism Kinga mentions around or connected with Sia's movie music. Yeah.
I think it is possible, but it is not a common thing. It is possible, but the problematic issue here is that there is no one major scheme of or a major model of a person on the spectrum. It's this community and this group of people is so heterogeneous that you just even if you employ an actor with on the spectrum with autism, it's not enough to show this whole variety of people in this group. So so this is, of course, this is a good move for movie makers, but it not resolves the problem. The problem starts here when we have this one, let's say, standard model of people on the spectrum in the movies or TV shows, and this creates a definition of a person on the spectrum for audience, and that's the problem. We need much more variety here.
Of course, feel free to discuss with our presenters. There is a space for the discussion. There is chat, of course. So if you would like to ask them further on, please do. The thing you said about the possibility of neurotypical actor playing the character with autism, it's more like the discussion about specific films or series. But I have a question, and it's more theoretical. I have a question regarding the theoretical framework you showed us, and this is about the medical narrative and deficit narrative. What is the difference really, since the medical discourse, it shows autism as a disease, and I think the deficit narrative also shows this autism as a disease. So what is the difference? It is unclear to me. Yeah.
Well, these two narratives are not totally separated from each other. Actually, I would say now that the medical one is like a subtype of the deficit narration, because this medical one, not all the medical narratives are negative. Let's say we can see the example of obesity. When it was started to be depicted as a disease, there was actually a huge change from and a huge movement for the destigmatization of obesity. So not all the medical narratives are negative, and the deficit one it's more general category. The deficit one is we can see that, for example, 90% of newspapers articles they are written in this deficit narrative, and they are focused on problems that people on the spectrum face in their daily lives, and they do not show, let's say, the real life of the people on the spectrum. They only concentrate on what is wrong with them, or what is wrong with the environment they live in. So I would say that this deficit discourse is just a more general category, and the medical one is just is one of the subtypes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the two narratives, I think they are really influential. I've just myself said that autism like a disease, right? So I've just used the word, but of course this is like this was connected with my question. I had the question in mind, so that is the reason. But we could really discuss a lot of issues. I think the autism is not the only the only issue here. You mentioned obesity. I've heard about anorexia and other eating disorders, which are also discussed extensively. And thank you very much. Kinga did comment on your answers, so please feel free to look at these comments. I will just skip them since our time is limited, because we have our questions to other presenters, other speakers. Anna, well, there are a lot of polls here, and we all agreed when we were speaking using chat that this is really important that you have showed and analyzed what is happening in our country. But I have a question for you regarding left wing and right wing media, because I wonder, could we really could really state that in Poland the division into left wing and right wing media is correct? Does that mean left-wing media in Poland exist at all? Because I have done my doubts. Is it more about like right-wing media and more liberal media, which of course the liberal side of course supports LGBT community? So if you could comment on this.
Yeah. Thank you for this question. I think that's it should be asked first of all whether we deal in Poland with the real right-wing parties and real left-wing parties and real liberal parties. Yes, so this is a whole question about the state of democracy and the political system in Poland. But let's skip that. I will refer only to the media. Well, I focused during my research and in this presentation, I focused on the clash between the liberal media and the right-wing or conservative media. So I refer to it very strictly, but we have some left-wing media in Poland which describe themselves and characterize themselves as left-wing. This is, for example, Przegląd Weekly and Nie Weekly, who are, as I said, even on their websites, refer to themselves as a left-wing ones. So I was studying the Przegląd front covers, but I did not refer to them during my presentation or in my presentation, because they didn't really refer or reach out for the visual aspects of LGBT issues. Basically, during these 5 years, they really rarely I would say that yes, very, very rarely they reach out for the LGBT issues at all. So that's why my major subject of my today's presentation was the division between the liberal media and the conservative media, which I would say are something more important. They are identity media, and they describe themselves as identity media. So it's not even the conservative ones, it's something more, yes, it's more biased, there are more partisan media. And as it occurs, each media, I would say opinion forming media or social political media is a kind of subjectivized or is a kind of politicized in Poland. So these are hard times we live in, I would say.
Yeah, thank you very much for answering. This left-wing, right-wing, centered, liberal divisions are, I think, at most ambiguous, to say the least, right? Throughout in Poland and throughout the world, I think. So this is the times we are living. And we have questions for Megan as well. There are some questions. I think I can see there are some questions on Q&A and some on chat sections of our panel. And so let's start with the first one. The question asked by Catherine. Megan, how successful are the Shipibo in terms of having their political rights represented in the UN?
Well, the UN provides a really wide basis of indigenous people, and they've secured their rights with the UN, but in practice that doesn't always happen. A lot of the threats in Shipibo territories come from illegal land titling. They have the right through the UN for prior consultation, but often the government and corporations who want to put in projects such as deforestation or dam projects won't consult them. And there's also a lot of illegal land titling going on, so selling lands which are indigenous without like a legal basis for it. So even though the UN have really good intentions and have a very broad range of rights to protect the Shipibo, in practice, indigenous peoples in the Amazon aren't really having their rights protected because of illegal loopholes.
I hope that answers your question, Catherine, and I think it does. I have a question as well. Are you aware of other similar indigenous communities when it comes to this digital technologies, or any other indigenous communities that are suited to digital technologies, but also centered in materiality, as you showed?
Yeah, I saw your question. I thought that was really interesting. I have to say I haven't looked at a lot of other indigenous groups, but I would say that in the Amazon, there's a lot of indigenous groups who practice ayahuasca shamanism, which I think is uniquely suited to digital technologies. It's referred to very widely as the television of the forest. So I think there is something about ayahuasca shamanism itself that is suited to digital technology. But the Shipibo have really capitalized on that. That could be because of their business acumen, or I'm not really sure. But neighboring indigenous groups like the Wampi Nation, they've declared independence, and they have shamanic practices, but it's not. They don't practice ayahuasca shamanism, and they don't really engage with digital technologies or with outsiders. So I do think there is something unique about the Shipibo in having a practice of ayahuasca shamanism that makes it uniquely suited to digital technologies and expansive relationships with outsiders. They also have a history of taking over other groups and subsuming them into the Shipibo. So I think the Shipibo are both suited to digital technologies and a very expansive world outlook, whereas other indigenous groups are self-determination can look quite different. But in the Amazon, apart from in the Amazon, I'm not really sure about indigenous groups suited to digital technologies. I have heard things about, indigenous Australian people.
In North America, I've read some articles about North American native Indians groups that were using digital technologies excessively to just to share their culture and just to maintain their groups, like communities, to find their origins, for example, right? So I guess there are many more groups, but of course you have chosen to study, to research Shipibo, which are extremely interesting. It's an extremely interesting group. We have to slowly come to an end, but you could look at the chat section. There are some comments there, for example, from Kinga, who notices that there are also LGBT plus media in Poland as well. So maybe we are not that but we are okay as a society, and maybe the things will be normal once again. Let's hope.
I keep my fingers crossed for that, but unfortunately, they are, as Kinga also noticed, they are not mainstream, so they are just focused on their own community. But let's keep our finger crossed that the situation in Poland will improve.
Okay, let's end with this positive message. And thank you very much once again, and see each other during the next panels, next sections. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for chairing this panel. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.